What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Week 2 is here, which means there's been more injuries. There's been stuff that has happened in week 1 that we need to know going into week 2. So today I'm going to give you guys the top 36 wide receivers heading into week 2 of the fantasy football season with all of that new information. Hopefully getting the right guys into your lineup to get you a win here this week. That said, if this is your first time at the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button because we are going to be dropping the running back version of this video here later today. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video. Let's start talking about these wide receivers. All right, so as you can see, I got the tier maker pulled up on the screen. That said, you see the label on the left side of the screen, elite wide receiver 1s all the way down to low end wide receiver 3s. That's how I'm viewing that player if you're plugging them into your lineup. And then there's going to be a numeric ranking next to each name. But let's start in tier 1. I got 3 guys as the elite wide receiver 1s here this week. It shouldn't really be a surprise for the names. Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. Ja'Marr Chase, technically, if you look at last week's rankings, we need a couple of weeks to get some more data, but we are going to be looking at last week's fantasy points allowed. They did have a bad matchup. Jacksonville is a bad matchup technically. They were 4th best against the wide receiver last week. I'm not going to put too much stake into that. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase is still Ja'Marr Chase. And CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson are kind of the same thing, except Justin Jefferson on the opposite end plays against the Atlanta Falcons. They were ranked 28th against the wide receiver position last week, giving up 34.6 fantasy points per game. So that's something that I'm going to be looking at. Obviously, like I said, we do need a couple more weeks to make the data look really good for us. But for now, this is what we're working with. So that's what we're going to be looking at. But these guys are all elite no matter what. Now, moving on to tier 2, that is the high-end wide receiver 2s. I got 3 players in this tier as well. It's Malik Nabers at 4, Puka Nacua at 5, and Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6. Malik Nabers gets the Dallas Cowboys on the road in Dallas. Last week, they only allowed 11.8 fantasy points. So that was the 3rd best in the NFL last week. Obviously, Jalen Hurts didn't throw the football too much when they played the Dallas Cowboys, so that is maybe a little bit skewed. Still playing Malik Nabers. Puka and Amon-Ra. Puka had a good week 1. Amon-Ra didn't. I'm not too worried about either of these guys. I think both of these guys are still the centerpieces of their offense, so we should be playing those guys as high-end wide receiver 1s. Let's go to tier 3, and that is the low-end wide receiver 1s. I got 7 wide receivers in this tier, getting us all the way to the wide receiver 13. Now, that said, this tier is going to consist of McConkey, Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, Nico Collins, Bryant Thomas Jr., Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and AJ Brown. So like I said, a little bit of a larger tier, but all of these guys should be considered low-end wide receiver 1s. McConkey, he gets the Las Vegas Raiders on the road. Last week, they were ranked 29th against the wide receiver position, giving up 34.7 fantasy points. So we saw Justin Herbert throwing the football a little bit around the yard. Should continue here in week 2 in a matchup that should be good based off of last week's production. I'm going to skip a couple of the other guys. Obviously, JSN, Nico Collins, and BTJ, these players are still elite. Sam Darnold looked mediocre to say the least. The Texans looked mediocre to say the least, and BTJ didn't look like he was that great. But at the end of the day, these players are elite talents at the wide receiver position, so don't overthink a bad week 1. Just plug them into your lineup going into week 2. That said, let's have a little bit of a discussion about Drake London because this is a player who is going into Minnesota on the road against the Vikings, and he's battling a shoulder injury. He's questionable coming into the week. I don't know whether or not he's going to be playing at this point in time. We don't have a lot of information at the time of this recording. This is coming out later today. I'm recording it in the morning. Obviously, as we see some practice reports and things like that, we'll get a better idea over the course of the week. But if he plays, I'm still playing him as a top 12 guy as a low-end wide receiver 1. Now, the last 2 guys in this group, I got number 12, Garrett Wilson, and number 13, AJ Brown. Both of these players have good matchups on paper. Last week, the Buffalo Bills obviously gave up a ton of fantasy points to the Baltimore Ravens. The Jets are not the Baltimore Ravens. However, we did see a little bit of a weakness in that secondary for Buffalo, so Garrett Wilson should be in store for a pretty decent game this week. Again, building rapport with Justin Fields. AJ Brown did not have a good week 1. Like we said, Dallas kind of kept them shut down. Hurts didn't really throw the football too much. At the end of the day, though, Kansas City, they gave up a ton of fantasy points, actually the most fantasy points in week 1 to wide receivers and Justin Herbert. Maybe AJ Brown can get it back together here in week 2. Like I said with Nico and BTJ, even though he had a bad week 1, still a stud. Plug him into your lineup. Don't overthink it. Let's go to tier 4. Tier 4 has 7 players in this tier. I got Marvin Harrison Jr., T. Higgins at 15, Courtland Sutton at 16, Devonta Adams at 17, Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, and DK Metcalf, and that rounds out the entire tier of high-end wide receiver 2s. Kind of like I said with Ja'Marr Chase, on paper, it is a bad matchup based off of last week's production. However, that Jacksonville team, they did play the Carolina Panthers. This is not the same situation, so don't read too much into that if you're looking at strength of schedule numbers. Courtland Sutton coming in at 16, a little bit of a tougher matchup. Indianapolis obviously held the Dolphins really to a very, very bad week. I don't think that the Broncos are going to be the same type of matchup. However, it's tough to know. Maybe this Indianapolis Colts team is just a little bit better than we had imagined. So either way, though, Courtland Sutton should still be the number 1 target for Bo Nix, and he should still see a pretty healthy target share. I want to talk about Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka because I have these guys back-to-back right now, 18 and 19. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a good matchup on the road. The Houston Texans, they were allowing 33.7 fantasy points in week 1. Obviously gave up a pretty decent amount of fantasy football points to the Los Angeles Rams, and it was Devontae Adams, obviously, and Puka Nacua. Now, I think that Rams receiving core is a tiny bit better than this Buccaneers one, but not by much. I think these guys should still have a very good day. Mike Evans, he's going to be touchdown dependent. Emeka Egbuka showed that he can be a star in this league right away. Plug both of these guys into your lineup. Don't overthink it. If you're debating between either of the Buccaneers receivers, most likely I would be recommending you're getting them into your lineup. So that's really kind of what I would be looking at in this group. I do think that matchup is good based off of what we saw from last week. So give me Mike Evans and Egbuka here as high-end wide receiver 2s. Moving on down to tier 5, for the sake of time, I'm not going to touch on every single wide receiver in detail. We'll focus on some matchups and give you guys some opinions there. Obviously, if you guys always want some extra added context, put something in the comments down below. I'm happy to respond to you guys, and or go join the Discord. The Discord is free to join. But tier 5 for me has 6 wide receivers. These are the low-end wide receiver 2s. I got Tedero McMillan, Ricky Pearsall, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers, and Tyreek Hill is the last player in this tier. Ricky Pearsall gets the New Orleans Saints on the road. Last week, they were only allowing 17.8, which was 7th best in the NFL. Fantasy points, that is, to the wide receiver position. Juwan Jennings is injured. Brock Purdy is injured. It does seem like Brock Purdy will play. I don't know if Jennings will play. Pearsall should see a very, very good target share, especially too that Kittle is on IR as well. So he's kind of the one man that's still standing in this wide receiver room or in this receiving core in general for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not really going to be overthinking it. Yes, it could be a little bit of a disappointing week if you're expecting a huge boom, but he has a very high floor in my opinion. That said, let's talk about Zay Flowers, who had a really big week 1, like I said, against the Buffalo Bills. A little bit of a tougher matchup this week. He gets the Cleveland Browns, who held Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to very minimal fantasy points last week. In fact, the Cleveland Browns were the number 1 team against wide receivers in week 1, only giving up 8.4 fantasy points to the wide receiver group. It's pretty incredible what they were able to do. I think this is a tough secondary. This is a tough defense, and Zay Flowers may not replicate what he did for you in week 1 because this cornerback group, this safety group, all of these guys here on this Cleveland Browns defense, I think they are legit a tough defensive matchup for the remainder of the year. So Zay Flowers, I'm tempering the expectations. Tyreek Hill's the only other guy in this tier that I want to talk about in detail. He gets a pretty decent matchup against the New England Patriots, who did give up 34.4 fantasy points to that group last week. That was 27th in the NFL amongst 32 teams, obviously. I think Tyreek Hill can maybe get a bounce back this week. This Dolphins offense does look a little bit suspect. I want to see him get a bounce back game. I think they might be in store for it. So I'm going to be firing up Tyreek Hill cautiously. At the end of the day, though, he still has an elite ceiling that most people don't possess for you in fantasy football. Tier 6, looking at these high-end wide receiver 3s, I got 5 guys in this group from wide receiver 27 all the way to 31. It's going to be Devonta Smith, George Pickens, Travis Hunter, Jerry Jeudy, and Rome Odunze. Now, Devonta Smith is a guy that I want to talk about. He gets a good matchup, like I said, against the Kansas City Chiefs, who gave up a ton of fantasy points to the Los Angeles Chargers. However, like I said, Jalen Hurts doesn't throw the football that much. He really caps the upside of a lot of the guys in this room. If we're nervous about A.J. Brown seeing a large enough target share, we should definitely be nervous about Devonta Smith. So for me, I just don't think he has the ceiling to give you respectable. Obviously, he's going to give you boom weeks, but I don't think he gives you this very safe floor as a wide receiver too, just because of the lack of the passing volume in this offense overall. So even though last week, technically, the Chargers gave up the most points, I'm still not too excited about firing up Devonta Smith. I also want to talk about Jerry Jeudy. Like I said, with that Buffalo Bills and Baltimore game, there was a lot of fantasy points that were going around. So Baltimore was technically the second worst against wide receivers last week because they gave up so many points to Josh Allen and the Bills. That's not going to be the norm. I don't think that the Cleveland Browns offense is the Buffalo Bills offense. So I'm not really reading too much into what that data is telling us right now. It does say good on paper. That said, though, Jerry Jeudy should still be fine. They're going to have to throw the football a lot in this game to keep up. So Jerry Jeudy, even Cedric Tillman is somebody that you should be interested in plugging into your lineup as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play for Tillman maybe this week. And then my final tier here I have is the low-end wide receiver 3s. It's 5 guys to get wide receiver 36. It's Hollywood Brown, Kobe Myers, Jameson Williams, Deebo Samuel, and Khalil Shakir. Really, the only 2 guys I think worth note right here is Hollywood Brown. Obviously, Worthy banged up, Rice out. We saw the 16 targets last week for Hollywood. You can definitely play play him as a wide receiver 3 and maybe get more if that target share replicates itself here in week 2. And Shakir gets the New York Jets, who did give up a ton of fantasy points last week. Even though, Sauce Gardner was in the lineup, they gave up points to Aaron Rodgers and DK and some of these other guys. Josh Allen should be able to go out and do just as much, if not more, than what Aaron Rodgers did. So Shakir, another week healthy, sneaks into here as like a wide receiver 3 for me. Should be a decent play for you. Now, some guys that I would kind of use similarly as those players in that tier that just barely missed the cut would be like Keenan Allen, Chris Olave, Tillman, Ridley, Diggs, Waddle, Pittman. That's kind of the group of guys that would just miss the cut here, but would potentially be in this low-end wide receiver 3 tier. Maybe not all the way down to Pittman, but Keenan, Olave, Tillman, Ridley, Diggs for sure would be guys in consideration here, but they just missed the cut because they weren't in the top 36. So there you have it, folks. My top 36 wide receivers as we head into week 2 of the fantasy football season. As always, if you guys enjoyed the content, you found something informative, entertaining, actionable, go ahead and do me a favor, hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and it does truly help us grow as a channel because YouTube then recognizes this as entertaining content and will recommend it to other people. So if you found something today, like I said, informative, entertaining, actionable, please, please, please do me the favor and hit that like button. Also, as I said at the beginning of the video, the running back version of this video is coming out later today, so make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. That way you don't miss that content. And last but not least, make sure you go join our free Discord. We are in there 24/7, 365, helping you guys with your fantasy football teams. It doesn't matter if it's redraft, dynasty, best ball, you name it. We're helping you guys with everything fantasy football and NFL related. So make sure you go join that. Like I said, free to join, no risk in doing that. With all that out of the way, nothing else for you guys today. I'll see you later this afternoon, I guess, for the running back episode. But until then, peace out.